All right, so this is gonna be episode 3 of deck profiles for Scarlet and Violet to journey together as part of the Exposé series. This episode is gonna be about Eternatus. All right, so first 2 episodes I covered Charizard, Pidgeot, and I covered Future. All right, and I classified them as the best deck in format and second best deck in format, respectively. All right. So I also classified them as control decks, right? And that's what they are, right? Um, and so for the last 4 episodes of this series, I'm going to be covering control decks, and so going to cover 3 control decks for the 2 types of control decks that there are. All right. So just to recap, Charizard EX, right, best deck in format, is also ironically um, what would be called in the English language a best deck. Right, so it's important to understand that despite obviously Pokemon's tremendous popularity in the West and worldwide in general, that Pokemon, of course, is a Japanese game, right? And so their game design may seem very mystified to us, and that's because, of course, Japanese people developed the game, right? And so, of course, you can't expect, um, you can't expect Japanese people to, be able to um, make the game very readily understandable, right, for the rest of the world, right? And so, yeah, Charizard would be one of those decks that, if you play other games, one of those archetypes of uh or classes that just basically carry you, basically, right? All you have to do is just be good at the game, and then the archetype or class, whatever, will do the rest, right? So that's how we kind of understand it in you know English or Western game design, right? But for the purposes of understanding kind of what type of deck Charizard is, best understand it as a quote unquote best deck. All right. So that's Charizard, right? And then I covered Future, right, which I called the second best deck in format, right? And Future, as opposed to Charizard, is a more thought based deck, right? So it's not a deck where, you can just, go burr, as we say, right? It's definitely a deck that requires a lot of planning, a lot of memory, right? And so it's not something that you're just gonna pick up and just win with, right? Especially um against something like a Charizard, right? So those decks are also control decks, right? But they're not best decks. How we would understand them in English game design is that there are decks that require a lot of sequencing and a lot of again memory, and so those decks, and also another part of those decks game design is that their attacks usually require some sort of condition to be fulfilled, or require some sort of negative effect to be removed, or some negative effect to be leveraged in part of your sequence, right? So how we would understand that in English game design is as uh combo style, right? And so those are your two types of control decks, right? You have your quote unquote best decks, and then you have your quote unquote combo decks. All right. So for this episode, we're gonna cover Eternatus, and Eternatus is also a combo deck. So this is gonna be a lot of uh very technical game design to explain, and so you know don't get too lost. A it's definitely a more a deck on the harder side for sure. So obviously I'm going to be covering more straightforward decks after the series, right? But don't get too um you know daunted, right, by the difficulty of this deck, right? So I'm going to try my best to make it as simple as possible. And again, just like I said for future, right? Don't try to steal this video and then just be like, yo, I'm gonna go to my local hobby shop and I'm just gonna buy them out of Eternituses and all the stuff in this deck, and then I'm just gonna go to my locals and then I'm just gonna be like, yeah, I saw this deck online, it's super sick, right? Please, test this deck first, right? Understand its design, right? And then go out into play if you're gonna play it. Otherwise, you can just, you know, test with it in a testing group or something like that, or play on like casual ladder on Pokemon trading card game live, right? But yeah, this is not a deck that you would just pick up and go to locals with and try to think that you're gonna, just devastate your opponents, right? So I'm gonna get right into it. All right. So I hope you enjoy. All right. Sorry. All right. So so Eternatus, right? It's a combo deck, right? So uh basically what you want to understand, right, is that um you're gonna feel like you're going to be very ahead, right, relative to your opponent, right? Um, just because of kind of all the parts of this deck and stuff like that, and how many like ways you have to turn the game, right? And so it's important when you're playing this deck that you're not going to, um, try to go out of sequence, right? That's like a very key part of playing combo is that you have to be very decisive, right? And as a result, you want to um just basically again, right? Plan, right? That's like the key to playing combo, right? Um yeah. So I'm gonna try to help you understand kind of how you want to plan here. So once you kind of get a full glimpse of this list, right? I'm gonna kind of flash some of the cards here, right, that are in this list, right? So you can try to, paint a picture while I'm painting this picture, right? And so that's kind of the list, right? So you can just pause the video and then take a look at the list and the counts and stuff like that, right? But yeah, so because this is definitely gonna be wild ride for sure. All right, so again, right, Eternatus is the main attacker for this deck, right? So this card was printed in Citrus Sparks, right? And so uh not to get, caught up, into those kind of Citrus Sparks set list, but this was like the control archetype to come out of certain sparks, like that, like you would master, right? For you know, playing, at events, right? So has first attack Dynablast, right? For a dark energy, it does 10 damage plus, right? Your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon EX. This attack does 80 more damage, right? So again, right, 10 damage, right? And if you're an EX, you do 90, right? So 90 damage, one energy, no drawbacks. Already, devastating, right? And then as a second attack, World Ender for fire and two dark energy. That's 230 damage, right? Let me see if we can get a shot here. And discard Stadium and play. If you can't, this attack does nothing. Alright. So on paper, right, you'd read this card and you'd be like, okay, well, does 90 damage for one energy, which is cool, right? But most EXs are gonna have to probably get hit by this attack 3 times, right, to take a knockout without damage modifiers. So you know, obviously, this deck is not gonna be able to trade, right, with thing just by using Dynablast, right? Then the second attack, right, fire, dark, right? What the heck is this energy cost, right? And then also you have to have a stadium to play, right? So again, right, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, right, this is a combo deck, right? So um, you're not just gonna get your win easy, right? This is not something where you just have to stack your hand and then just discard a bunch of energies from your hand, or something like that, or just flood the energy border energies and then just discard them all. This is a deck where you're gonna have to do a lot of planning, right? And you're not gonna be able to go out of sequence too much, right? So yeah. Also, that is the other thing is that 230 is just a very weird number, right? It's a number that we haven't seen at all since and we haven't seen it in Sword and Shield. We didn't see it in Scarlet and Violet until now, right? And so we're just like, what the heck is 230, right? And again, right, this is where you have to study set lists, understand the format, right, and then understand kind of um how games are supposed to play out, right? So Surge Sparks, right? You're familiar with the Surge Sparks set list, right? Um, right. Had a bunch of interesting cards come out to it, and namely the card that came out this set was a stadium named Lively Stadium, right? So Lively Stadium reads each basic Pokemon in play gets 30 HP, right? And so, for example, we're talking about Eternatus here. So if you have a Pokemon, right, that has like 150 HP, like Eternatus, right, then you put Lively Stadium in play, it has 180, right? And so, on paper, this is a pretty strong stadium, right? Considering all the kind of snipe attacks that we have in format, right? And so obviously this card, is very powerful, right? Um, and there was also another card that you're probably familiar with, from Surgeon Sparks, right? Called Pikachu EX. I don't know if you've been living under a rock or not, but this card came out in Surgeon Sparks, right? And so this card has the ability Resolute Heart. Pokemon has full HP and will be knocked out by damage from attack. If not knocked out, and its remaining HP becomes 10, right? So you read this card, right? And this is, if you're a pleb, right, you're looking at this card and you're like, damn, this is the best card out of Surge Sparks, right? Or you're probably thinking, Latias or something like that is the best card out of Surge Sparks, right? Oh my god, my basics get free retreat, right? And yeah, you would be right. This is a pretty good card, right? For collectors, players, whatever, right? But one thing you notice, right, when you read this card, right, is that if you read all its stats, right, it is a basic Pokemon for starters, right, and it also is 200 HP, right. So for all you guys that can't do math out there, right, um, you put a Lively Stadium in play, right. This Pokemon gets 30 HP, so it has 230 HP, right, and so um, that's still good, right? Like a lot of attacks, Phantom Dive and stuff like that. For all you guys that can't play Charizard, right? Does 200 damage, so it's not gonna be able to knock out this Pikachu, right? Or it's not even gonna be able to put it at 10 HP, right? So yeah, that's all well and good, right? But this card attack does 230 damage, right? So it's going to, whether there's a lively stadium in play or not, it's gonna do 230 damage to the Pikachu, and then it's gonna discard the stadium. So the Pikachu's gonna have 30 damage, right? 230 damage on it, while 220 because of its ability. And then Lively Stadium play is gonna get discarded, and the Pikachu is still gonna have 220 damage, except it's not gonna have 200 HP, 230 HP. It's gonna have 200. So this card one shots Pikachu, yes, right? So for all the people that read Surgeon Sparks that lesson was like, oh my god, how the heck are we gonna balance Pikachu? Pokemon game design bad. Finally they broke. You're wrong. But one didn't break. You did, right? So yeah. So that's kind of what Pokemon was going for, when they printed, um Eternatus, right? And again, right? Pokemon is a game development company, right? Game Freak is a game development company, right? And so, you know, with probably, the biggest IP in the world, right? You not going to expect them to, oversight something like Eternatus, right? Especially considering if you've been playing Pokemon for a while, right? Like Sword and Shield, Eternatus, Signature with a game which Eternatus came out, right? Eternatus VMAX from Darkness Ablaze was also a best second format, right? So, um, yeah, you're not going to, pull a fast one on the Pokemon community and be like, oh, what a crappy set, right? Just Pikachu and Latias. This set has really good cards in it. And that is like an understatement like no other, right? And so yeah. Um yeah. Turnisis definitely the best that could come out of Surgeon Sparks, right? So that's kind of the lore behind Turnisis attack. Alright. So kind of a theme in um Scarlet and Violet game design is how you get edges, right? Is you usually have, you know, um win conditions, right? Where you can influence how many prizes you take, right? So in Scarlet and Violet, obviously, well, actually, it was in Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield, they reverted, the stadium rule, so that you know, you could not play um a supporter on your first turn, right? Unless stated otherwise, right? And so obviously, that slowed the game down significantly, right? Not only that, they printed, V Maxes, right? Which had, tremendous amounts of HP, right? And, the edge you really got in Sword and Shield was more like, well, don't want to get into really the edge that you want to get in Sword and Shields, because that's not what this video is about. But Sword and Shield, right? They took away the support on your first turn rule, right? And so going into Scarlet and Violet, to gain an edge, right? They've made the theme kind of manipulating, or rather influencing, the way you can how many prizes you can take, right? And so with a deck like Eternatus again, right? You read the card and you're just like, okay, sure, I can do 90 damage from EX, or I can, discard the stadium and play, right? But um, you know, even if I take a knockout, I'm only gonna take one prize, right? And again, right? This is just a lack of just format knowledge, right? There's so many cards in format that basically give Eternatus an edge that is crazy, right? And it's what makes it probably, well, it's a it's just a very, very good combo deck. It's a very good combo deck, right? But again, right, to balance the fact that it's such a good combo deck, the deck is also very just hard, right? So again, right, um, the deck has a lot of you know, um, really, really good sequences, right, and a lot of really good board states that you can create, right? But the way you balance it is you make the deck very hard to play, right? So high skill power, high power level, also very high skill ceiling, right? And so yeah, um, kind of hard to understand that, right? From a you know English game design perspective, because um generally, because like a lot of popular games, obviously in North America, right, are not card games, right? So it's very hard to understand that you'd make a deck, right, that has very high skill power but very high skill ceiling, right? Considering a lot of games that come from Japan are what are called gotcha games, right? Where you basically just throw a bunch of money in, right, to get more power, right? This is much different in that you know you have this game, right, where you have these cards which should be pretty expensive. Turn assist and all this, like a turn assist is a hollow rare, right? And so, we've seen hollow rares hit like $50, right? $75 with like Jirachi from Team Up, I believe, right? And so it's not unfamiliar, right, to see hollow rares get expensive, right? So again, right, it's just like, oh my gosh, right? Why doesn't Pokemon just make a um why doesn't Pokemon just make a and I'm gonna make a point here. So I'm gonna take it out of tabletop mode, right? Um so why doesn't Pokemon, make um just always make, extremely expensive, you know, Roblox Pokemon, with like three arts in the set, and then like a promo, and then like make a special set, make like another art for it, and then make that deck extremely powerful, and then only the super rich can buy it, right? Because if you want a play set, you're gonna have to pay like $500, right? It's because again, Pokemon is not an art company. Pokemon is not some production company, right? Pokemon, is a game, right? And so It's made by game developers, not made by artists. It's not made by, you know, directors, right? It's not made by, you know, uh, like people who make trinkets or something like that, right? Pokemon is a game, right? And so it's made by game developers, right? So they don't give a damn, how much their cards cost. What they care about is if you investigate their game design, right? You're gonna find that it wasn't made by some geek off the street, right? So yeah, that's another point that you need to understand. That's also very key, right? And I'm already getting like 25 minutes in this video, and I haven't even gotten into the deck, right? It's just because like we've been seeing, without coming out of Sword and Shield, right? Where of course, you have VMAXs, right? People, there was basically practically like no decks come out of Sword and Shield, right? To that were like able to compete, just on their own against VMAXs, right? And so I think a lot of that shock is still resounding amongst Pokemon players, right? And so you know they're just like there can't be another good single prize deck, right? And again, right, even if you go into Sword and Shield, you could probably find some decks, single price decks that could go toe to toe probably against VMAXs. Obviously, that wasn't what they were trying to design the game to be like, but yeah, they're definitely decks. You know, um, like Mad Party, for example, just off the top of the head, right? That could probably go toe to toe against something like an Eternatus VMAX, right? Obviously, Eternatus VMAX is just gonna win, but right. So yeah, all this noise because that's what it is. About Pokemon just got to keep making shiny Roblox Pokemon. It's gotta be stamped out, right? And so yeah, so gonna have to rush through the profile. Um, so if it's gonna be a bit messy, just wanted to just really lay that foundation because again, right, Pokemon has really been held, you know, it's been held to the fire, right, as they say, right, and it's just because you can't just show up at your local hobby shop, spend $500 and then go win a regional, right? People, they don't investigate, right? So that's why you get this chorus of voices that are saying that Pokemon needs to do better, right? So, yep. Let me just get into the game design for this deck. All right. So again, right. So a turn to main attacker, right? You're gonna play 4 copies, right? So 4 copies, right? No big deal, right? And then the card that you're going to be setting up throughout the game, right, is going to be Togekiss, right, as you can see here, right? Can't see the art, but you can see the abilities and the attacks, right? Uh, so Togekiss, first printed in Obsidian Flames, right? Had the ability Precious Gift, right? Uh, Once at the end of your turn, after you attack, you may use this ability, draw cards, you have 8 cards in your hand, right? Then it has the attack Power Cyclone for 2 colors energy, does 110 damage. Moving energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. Right? So um again, right, this was meant to be played in like single prize decks, right? That you're setting up a board, right, where, you're gonna have to, you play chess, right? Sets up like a gambit, right? Just use a metaphor, right? And you know, uh, you'd be able to, propel yourself to victory through, precious gift, and then your attacker, right? So in Obsidian Flames, you would have probably been playing this with something like Palafin, right? Right, Palafin from Obsidian Flames is the attack Jet Punch, right? 30 damage. That's 30 damage to one of your bench Pokemon. And Justice Kick, 210 damage. This Pokemon didn't move from the bench to the active spot. This attack does nothing, right? Would have comboed very well with Palafin. Togekiss has free retreat, right? And then, you're gonna need a lot of pieces because again, Palafin's also a combo deck. So yeah, Precious Gift combined with Justice Kick and like experience shares, yeah, you'd have a very good board, right? So yeah, Surge Sparks they printed Togekiss again, right? And this Togekiss has the ability Wonder Kiss. Once when your opponent's active Pokemon is knocked out, flip a coin. If heads, take one more prize card. The effect of Wonder Kiss does not stack, right? And so I don't think I've covered this ability yet, but basically how this ability works, right, is um, it reads the effect of Wonder Kiss does not stack. So what does that mean? Is that the effect, right, which is what happens when you flip heads, right? Um, if you get it, then you can't use Wonder Kiss again for the rest of that sequence, right? And so yeah, you wouldn't be able to like flip Wonder Kiss, get heads. Then if you have a second Token Kiss, flip Wonder Kiss again, and then get heads again, right? The Wonder Kiss is out of sequence after that, and so that's what it means by the effective Wonder Kiss. Wonder Kiss does not stack. All right. So yeah. So alongside the Eternatus, obviously you're just not going to be able to win right against Roblox decks was just an Eternatus, right? So you're gonna be setting up Togekiss, right? And so you're gonna play 4 copies of Togepi, right? These are the Togekeys from Surge Sparks, right? As opposed to the Togepi's from um Obsidian Flames, right? That had the attack, whiny voice, right? Then rolling tackle, right? This Togepi's attack does 30 damage, right? And so gives you really good advantage against, 60 HP Pokemon to trade with them if you go first, right? And baby Pokemon, right? So yeah, play 4 copies of that, right? Then another opener you're gonna have in your deck, Squawkabilly EX, right? So Squawkabilly EX, right? Needs no introduction. Has the ability Squawk and Seize, right? Uh Once you're in your first turn, you may discard your hand and draw 6 cards. You can't use this. You can't use more than one Squawk and Seed ability during your turn. Right. So yeah, then it has the attack motivate for colorless energy, just 20 damage. Attach it to 2 basic cards, energy cards from the discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Right. So this card is extremely powerful in this deck, and I'm gonna get into why. Right. So that's another over deck. And then finally you play 1 copy of Monkey Dory, right? Monkey Dory from Twilight Masquerade, right? Has the ability Adrenal Brain. Once on your turn, this Pokemon has any dark energy attached. You may move up to 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Right? So we've seen this on cards like Meowstic, from Meowstic from I think it's Chilling Rain, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and we've also seen this on Dusknoirs from Sun and Moon. I think it was from Unbroken Bonds, if I'm not mistaken. right? Or from X and Y, I'm not sure. And so this one just has a more strict condition, right? Where you have to have a dark energy attached to it, right? And then it has the attack Mind Bend for 60 for psychic and a colorless. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused, right? So obviously we're not using this card for its attack, right? But if you saw the set list, I mean the deck list, you know that this deck plays cards that allow you to attack with this card, right? If you need to, right? So those are your Pokemon for the deck, right? Your basic Pokemon, right? And so that gives you 10 openers, right? And so cards that are gonna get you into those openers, right? You're gonna play for Artisan, right? So Artisan, very good at helping you combo, right, with all the cards that you have, right? To open with in his deck, right? Namely, it's not in this pile. Yeah. Namely, Ultra Ball, right? And Drayden, right? So Artisan allows you to, basically um leverage these cards better, right? So you wouldn't have to, use all these cards to target the exact same cards, basically, right? So you play 4 copies Artisan, 4 copies Ultra Ball, 4 copies Drayden, right? So what I mean by leverage is, for example, Ultra Ball can target any card, any Pokemon, right, in your deck, right? Then also Drayden can target any Pokemon in your deck, right? And so you wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to, have to use Ultra Ball, right, to target a basic Pokemon, right? Probably the only Ultra Pokemon you'd want to, only basic Pokemon you want to target with Ultra Ball is Squawkabilly, right? So you effectively have 5 outs, right? What we call them in trading card game outs, right? To get in Squawkabilly on your first turn, right? And obviously it's just a combo piece, if you want to call it that. Um, to get a really good open, right? If you go first, right? Generally, if you're going second, you're not going to want to like search your deck for a Squawkabilly unless you know your hand's really bad. But that's what the Squawkabilly is for, right? Then Drayden also can target any Pokemon in your deck, right? But if you're using Drayden, on your first turn going second, right? Um, you can target a basic Pokemon, but you can also target an Artisan, right? Because if you read the errata, what's called the text, basically the rules of the card, right? Is that says you can target a trainer card, right? That you find from the top of your deck. And Artisan is a trainer card, right? So Artisan becomes a very good combo piece because now if you have like an Artisan and a basic Pokemon that in your Drayden search, right? Or a Scour as they call it in some trading card games, right? Or I think Discover, I'm not sure. Um, you can just target the Artisan to get the basic Pokemon you're looking for, right? As long as it's not Squawkabilly. And then you can use the Drayden's Discover or Scour to target something like a Togetic or a Togekiss, right? So yeah, that's how that combo works, right? The Artisan Drayden Ultra Ball combo. All right. So those are openings. Those are the opens to get your Pokemon, right? And then the opens to get your energy. You play 3 copies of Energy Search, right? So Energy Search was reprinted. It was printed, and this one is from, I think, Boundaries Crossed. Right, this one is from Black and White Boundaries Crossed, right? And it got printed in Scarlet and Violet, right? Base set, and it reads: search your deck for a basic energy card, reveal it, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck, right? So again, this would be another card that you can target with Drayden, right? Um, to combo like your opening attachment or stuff like that. Maybe you're trying to retreat something, or you're trying to get an energy for an Ultra Ball in your hand, right? This would facilitate doing that, right? So those are opens for the deck, right? Then all those fills, basically, you're gonna have this card right here, right? You're gonna play 4 copies of it. Arvin, right? So Arvin covered in the future episode, right? Um, reads search your deck for an item card and a Pokemon tool card, reveal them and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck, right? So this is just the only card that you can target with this is Ultra Ball, basically, right? So this is just basically if your combo's not gonna work, right? And you basically have to just, settle, right? Discarding stuff from your hand that you don't want to discard. And yeah. Otherwise, this card can be very powerful to set up a very good combo where you can KO a Roblox Pokemon, right? With Dynablast, right? And I'll get into that combo, as I get through this deck, right? So those are openers, right? That's about that's a lot of openers, right? Number doesn't matter, right? Let's get into the extenders, right? So um main extender, of course, is Togetic, right? So this is an extender you want to get into as soon as possible, right? You have a lot of outs to it, right? Drayden, Ultra Ball, right? And then the Togetic themselves, right? Play 3 copies, right? These are the Togetics from Obsidian Flames, right? If you're not playing these, I don't know what you're doing. I don't even know what the other Togetic does. Um, doesn't matter either because it's definitely not better than this one. Um, Togetic from Obsidian Flames, first attack, Shared Piece. For a colorless energy, each player draws 3 cards, right? And then its second attack is Speed Dive, 2 colorless energy, does 40 damage, right? So this deck, right? Um, again, it's a combo deck, right? And so you're not gonna just obviously, like we've seen just completely just miserable, you know. Um, it was just misery. There's no other way to put it. So again, right? When you're playing a combo deck, right? You're not gonna just want to just push your main attacker and then just try to take 6 prizes, right? So this card basically helps you get combo pieces, right? And also, do a lot of things, right? Give your opponent false hope. They drew 3 cards, right? And then you have, cards like, skipping ahead a little bit, like Judge, right? So make your opponent, think a lot, right? Okay, I have 3 cards now. Do I use them or do I keep them so that if I get judged, I can draw into them again? And generally, you draw 3 cards on top of playing your turn. It's very powerful, right? So definitely play these Togetix just for amusement, right? Just look at the Togekiss from Togetic from Surgeon Sparks. Um, Where is it? Togetic. Right? So it's Togetic from Surgeon Sparks. Can't really get a good shot at the art, but has the attack Drain Kiss, 30 damage, heals 30 damage myself. They're both 90 HP, one retreat. And this Togetic's attack does more damage, costs the same energy, and then its first attack makes you draw 3 cards. So there's no reason to play this card, right? If you want to play it, go ahead, but you definitely want to be playing shared piece Togetics. All right. So yeah, that's your main extender that you're trying to get into, right? And then, you know, um, the secondary main extender you're trying to get into is experience share, right? So experience share. This experience share was printed in Primal Clash, X and Y Primal Clash, right? And reprinted again, right, in Scarlet and Violet base set, right? Reads when your active Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, you may move a basic energy from that Pokemon to the Pokemon this card is attached to. Right? So, um obviously this card is like, a nod to experience share from the game, right? Which, ironically isn't even in Scarlet and Violet, right? They just completely took away the experience share mechanic and just basically made it a I think it's a setting that you can turn on and off. I'm pretty sure, right? Um, and so uh, yeah. So they've had experience share, throughout um old school Pokemon games, right? And then they phased it out around Generation 6, right? But yeah, this experience share, right? So it's a secondary combo piece you're trying to get into, right? This card combo so well in this deck, right? Um, let you attack with Togetic, without it, breaking your board. Um, let you, uh, loop World Enders, right? Let you attack with Squawkabilly, right? Let you attack with Monkey Dore, right? This card does a lot, right? So, right, that's your secondary extender, right? And then your basically your uh fallback, if you want to call it that, right, is Mela, right? Oh, this is the full art Mela from Prismatic Evolutions. Uh Kind of hard to read because it's full art, but it says you can use this card only if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Attach a basic fire need card from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. If you do, draw cards until you have 6 cards in your hand. Right? So this card again, right? Comboed with uh Spirit Share, right? Lets you, loop world enders, right? Then final main extenders in this deck, play Judge, right? 4 copies, right? Basically just um, lets you do a lot of stuff on your turn, and then, gives you a good board state, right? Going back into your turn, right? Then you play 1 copy Palpad, 1 copy Super Rod, right? And then final extender is uh Calamitous Snowy Mountain, right? This card was printed in Paldea Evolved, right? And reads when any player attaches an energy card from their hand to one of their basic non water Pokemon, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon, right? So again, right? Eternatus it does a lot of damage, right? But it's gonna need some help, right? And so this basically lets you, you know, not have to do a lot of damage, right? As much damage as you would normally have to. Um, and so, um, yeah, this deck again, right? Part of its combo is discarding stadiums, and so being able to, do something like put its calamitous in play, have it, influence your opponent's board, and then be able to discard it, right? Where your opponent would make a decision that they necessarily wouldn't want to make, right? Um, very powerful, right? So 2 copies, right? Which gives you, 6 stadiums, right? So that if you have to hit, 6, single price Pokemon, you can do it. Right? So those are the extenders for the deck, right? And your win conditions, you're gonna play obviously the main wish conditions. Um Play 2 copies of Togekiss from Obsidian Flame Surge Sparks, and 2 copies of Togekiss from Obsidian Flames, right? So this gives you, one to evolve, one to pitch, right? Gives you one to prize, one to evolve, right? And then if you're trying to, put, for example, 2 Togekisses into play, 2 Togekiss from Surge Sparks into play, right? You can do that. Otherwise, again, right? This Togekiss is more one to pitch, one to evolve, right? Or one to prize, one to evolve, right? So, yeah, play 4 of those, right? And obviously, since these are um, the same rules, right? The same rules apply to both these cards, right? They're both, Togekiss card, right? And they're both, uh, they just don't have a rule box, right? So they're just, standard Pokemon, whatever you want to call them, right? Um, you can only play a maximum of 4 copies of any combination, right? So you could play like three Togekiss from Surge Sparks, 1 copy of Surge Togekiss from Obsidian Flames. You can play 3 copies of Obsidian Flames, 1 copy of Surge Sparks. Although I don't know you'd want to do that, or you could play 4 copies of Togekiss from Surge Sparks, 0 copies of Togekiss from Obsidian Flames, right? But you can't play more than 4 in total, right? Those are your main win conditions, right? Then gonna play 2 copies of Crispin, right? Crispin printed and Stella Crown, right? As the effect, search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards of different types, reveal them, and put one of them into your hand. Attach the other one to one of your Pokemon. Shuffle them into your deck. Shuffle your deck, right? So, yeah, this deck plays Fire and Dark Energy, right? So, Chris is very powerful in this deck, right? And then play 1 copy Boss's Orders, right? And then 1 copy Rare Candy, right? Then play for the resources, play 3 copies of Fire, right? Play 5 copies of Dark, right? And then you play 1 copy Legacy Energy, right? So that's the ace spec for the deck. Legacy Energy reads: as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides every type of energy, provides only 1 energy at a time, right? Which means, so this card, when it's attached, it is any energy, right? Except it's just 1 energy, right? So it's just a basic energy. It's just you can see it as a basic energy, except it's any basic energy, right? And then the fact is, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, that player takes one fewer prize card. This effect of your legacy energy can't be applied more than once per game. Right. So right when this card got printed in Twilight Masquerade, obviously you see this card. It's a very powerful effect, right? Your opponent can't take a prize, right, on a Pokemon that has one prize. So obviously the first thing that came to people's minds, being English, video game players and game design enthusiasts, which I'm using very generously because definitely not. Um, is, oh my gosh, how can we abuse this so that my opponent can't take any prizes, right? Obviously, that's what this card's for. This card is for sequencing combos so that decks like Eternatus can compete against decks like Charizard, right? So yeah, this card is extremely powerful in Eternatus. Probably the best deck to play this deck in this format, right? And yeah, if you're not playing this deck in this deck, I don't know what you're doing, right? So that's the deck, right? And the main combos you want to know for this deck, right? To get into it real quick, so we run out of time, is Ultra Ball can target fire energy, right? So that if you want to attach to a bench Eternatus, right? Eternatus on the bench, experience share, right? You can attach darkness energy, to an active Eternatus, right? Pitch the fire energy, right, with Ultra Ball, right? And then you can attach, you know, experience share to a bench Eternatus, right? So that, you can get the fire energy, the dark energy once this thing gets knocked out, attach it to the Eternatus, right? Then with the fire energy in the discard pile, right, you can use Mela, right, to attach the darkness energy. I mean the fire energy. Then you have 4 outs plus 3 energy search, right, to get into the last darkness energy. Actually, you have 8 outs with legacy energy to get into the last energy for World Ender, right? So you could go Dynablast, right? Go Dynablast for 90 damage, right? Damages Eternatus, Spirit Share, Fire Energy into the discard pile, right? Then you can go Mela, right? Attach this, Spirit Share attach, right? And then, attach Darkness Energy for return, right? Then you can go World Ender. 320. 320 is, Dragon Pulse. And yeah, right? Then, obviously your opening combos, right? Going second, right? They're kind of like the more basic combos that you need to understand, right? So Drayden, right? You get like an Artisan and like an Eternatus for an example, then you can grab Artisan, Eternatus, Togepi, right? You're set, right? Kind of more intermediate combo, right? Drayden, right? You get an Artisan and a Togetic, right? You can go Artisan, Togetic, then you can go Togepi for the Artisan, and then you can get the evolve the Togetic next turn, right? So yeah, that's all the time we have, right? So thank you for listening, and hope to see you in the next video.